I'm Erin Wilson, and you are listening to Inside NC Labor, a podcast designed to inform and educate North Carolina citizens on the role that the Department of Labor plays in state government. Good morning, I'm Erin Wilson, the Director of Communications at the North Carolina Department of Labor, and I'm here with my co-host.
I'm Meredith Watson, and I'm the Public Information Officer here at the North Carolina Department of Labor.
And this morning we are here with Kevin Beauregard, who is the Deputy Commissioner of the Occupational Safety and Health Division. And this is our farewell to Kevin as he is retiring on September 30th. So welcome to the podcast today, Kevin.
Well, thank you, Erin. It's a kind of bittersweet time for me, but I'm glad to spend a few minutes with you.
Well, thank you for joining us. So, Kevin, before we get into your professional background, can you tell us a little bit about where you're from, where you went to college, about your family, and anything you would like to share?
Sure. I'm a North Carolina transplant. I actually was born and raised in Maryland, and I grew up in a city in between Washington and Baltimore. It used to be a small little town, and now it's one big city between Washington and Baltimore. It's called Laurel, Maryland. And I went to middle school and high school on a military base. Fort Meade is there. My father worked for NSA. I don't know if you ever heard of NSA. It's the National Security Agency, but my dad was a spy. And so that was kind of neat growing up. My mother also worked there. She was a linguist, and she knew about 20 languages. And so growing up, she used to yell at me in about 20 languages. I can't speak most of those languages, but I can tell you how to shut your mouth in about 20 languages. I attended University of Maryland, College Park campus. I got a BS degree in industrial technology. At the time, I wanted to do industrial engineering, but Maryland didn't have an engineering program. And of course, shortly after I graduated, they got an industrial engineering program. But I specialized in production and manufacturing and business management. I always thought I was going to go into industry. And right out of school, I did go into industry. I went into a plastics manufacturing facility. And we manufactured plastics that was used in production at other facilities. They made bottles out of them. They made car parts out of them. You name it, we did. Both things that for injection molding machines and for blowing machines as well, blow molding machines. And we also made some powders, plastic powders that were used for polymers. It was pretty nasty stuff, and that's kind of where I got interested in safety. I would go home with nosebleeds at night. Some of the plastics we used had cyanide in them. And so I didn't stay there too long, and I ended up going with the Maryland Occupational Safety and Health program. And I was there probably about 3.5 years before I came down to North Carolina.
Well, that's a very interesting background. My former boss at the legislature also worked at Fort Meade, and it was a Russian linguist and worked for the NSA, so interesting connection there.
Absolutely. It's a small world sometimes.
Very small.
So you started off as a safety compliance officer, then you moved into the role of Assistant Deputy Commissioner of the OSH Division, and now you're retiring from that role. Can you tell us a little more about your background, your work with NCDOL, and what led you to working for the state?
Yeah, I started to tell you that I worked for a plastics manufacturer. And while I was there, that's when I really got interested in safety and health. They had a lot of issues there. They had a lot of health hazards there. We did a lot of work for DuPont. You probably heard of DuPont Chemical. Well, we did the work that DuPont Chemical did not want to do because it was considered too dangerous or presented various health hazards. And so while I was there, I told you I had some nosebleeds and some other things. I don't think they believed in personal protective equipment. I didn't see very much of it. I saw a lot of people with missing fingers because the machines weren't guarded properly. And so that's when I got interested, and then I saw an ad for a safety consultant position with the state of Maryland, and it was with their workers' comp insurer. So I took that shortly, and then after I was in that position, probably not more than a year, I went over to the Maryland Occupational Safety and Health, which is a state program, much like North Carolina has. And on an interesting note, when I got in there, they got an assignment to inspect the place that I used to work at. And because of a conflict of interest, I couldn't do it, but I could tell them where to look. And so I told them all the places they should look, and they did find a lot of issues there. And And luckily, I think they corrected a lot of those problems, so people working there in the future didn't have to go there. When I came to Maryland, or North Carolina rather, they gave me an option of which office I wanted to work in, Raleigh, Winston-Salem, or Charlotte. And I didn't know much about North Carolina, and I went and looked at the areas, and I thought Charlotte would be a nice place to live. It seemed to be a place for younger. I was younger at the time. And they said, all right, then we'll put you in Winston-Salem. So I ended up in Winston-Salem. I never quite figured that one out. But that was right around the time a lot of things were going on in North Carolina. So I was a safety compliance officer and a discrimination officer for a short time, and I went into a supervisory role. And then in the late 90s, I went into the assistant director's office and was there for 24 years, either as the assistant director or the director.
What has been your favorite part about working at NCGOL these past 31 years?
I definitely say it's the people I've met, both within the department and within other state plans, other agencies throughout the country. North Carolina has a good national reputation, and I've been able to make a lot of friendships over the years with the people, and also the employers and employees in the states have been great to work with. When I came to North Carolina, we had double-digit injury and illness rates, and now we're probably in the low single digits, and so a lot of progress has been made. But I would definitely say the number one thing has been the people I've met while I was here.
What would you say has been your greatest challenge while working for the department?
I would say no doubt the greatest challenge has been funding, adequate funding for salaries for safety and health professionals. It's been very difficult to attract and retain safety and health professionals, and it's become more difficult over the last few years. We used to have probably a turnover rate of about 20% a year, which is not bad if you consider everything. Now our turnover rate is much higher, and when I last looked at it, we have about a 46% rate of either new employees or vacancies in safety and health compliance. It's very difficult to continue operations and get the experience you need from people when they're turning over so quickly. We're lucky if we get 3 years out of a safety or health compliance officer. It takes us about 1.5 years to get them adequately trained. And so because we're losing them so quickly, it's very expensive. First of all, training, we're in a constant training mode, but attracting and retaining people has been the toughest thing that we've had.
So what advice would you give your successor, Jennifer Hakewood, as she takes on the new role?
I think the biggest advice I could give is, to solicit feedback from the people that work in your organization. You don't necessarily have to agree with everyone or agree with everybody's position, but if you find out, what they're thinking, rely on their expertise and their knowledge, and get information from them, and then you can make an informed decision. You're going to have to make a lot of decisions as a director. Every day goes by and you're making some type of decision on either the program or the personnel or the funding, and just trying to get the information. I think it gets a lot of buy-in from your organization. And so I would solicit feedback, be a good listener, don't make a rash decision, think about it. Sometimes you get something and you want to fire off an email right away or pick up the phone and call somebody. And I think, sometimes you do want to make a decision, and you want to make a decision in a timely manner, but you want to make an informed decision. And sometimes you just got to kind of sit back and think about something for a while. So that would be the first thing I would do. The second thing, or second piece of advice I would give is do your best to stay current with technology. One of the things I've prided our program over the years is trying to be on the cutting edge of technology, which is not an easy thing to do when you're with state government. You all probably know from your experiences that state government usually runs 10 years behind the private sector when you're dealing with equipment and technology.
It sure does.
Absolutely.
OSH has been somewhat at an advantage. The turnover problem that I talked about has created an issue for us, but on the other side, it's created a lot of lapsed funding, and so we've been able to buy equipment and other things that we normally wouldn't buy. And so I know that you work on a different side of the Department of Labor, and we're trying to get some things for you now, like video conferencing equipment and other things. Well, OSH buys a lot of equipment, uses a lot of equipment. We're doing webinars, we're doing training programs now where it's an online-based training program that's interactive with the trainer. And all those things take money to do, but they also save a lot of money, and they provide a better training mechanism for employers who may not have 8 hours to pull their people out and send them to a training course, but they may have a few hours in a day to do some online training. And so technology changes very quickly. If you buy a computer today, it's out of date in a year and a half. And so to make sure that you're planning for the future all the time and turning over your equipment, and I do think that, like I said, OSHA has been a little bit ahead of the game in the Department of Labor in that, and we just need to keep up with it. And so if you keep up with technology, you'll be better off than the other folks doing the work that you're doing. And the final thing I'll say is, and it's kind of ironic because I'm just getting over a cold and I'm sweating a little bit right now, but I would say don't sweat the small things. There's a lot that goes on in the director's office, and a lot of things come at you, and there are very important things that happen, but there's also a lot of other things that happen that, although they're important, they're not. It's not going to be the end of the world if something doesn't get addressed right then. You have to prioritize and make sure you look at the big picture on things and take care of the big issues. And if you take care of the big issues, the little issues have a way of taking care of themselves. You know, if you hire, competent managers, you hire people that have the technical skills, you surround yourself with people. I've always told people in the past, if you're going to hire somebody, hire someone who's going to make your job easier. Why in the world would you ever want to hire someone that's going to make your job harder? You want to hire people. It's great to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you too. They'll just make you look better and make your job easier. And so I think all of those things I would recommend to Jennifer Hegwood. She's going to do a great job in the position. I've known her for a long time, and I've been working with her over the last few months, and I think she's ready.
Well, she's had a great example to learn from.
Do you have a few stories that you could share with the listeners about your time at NCDOL?
Yeah, I don't want to go into too many stories, but I'll tell you a few, and I'll try to keep people's names out of it to keep people from getting in trouble. But probably one of the most interesting stories with me, and particularly for those that are not familiar with the program over the last 30 years, is I came on board in 1991.
That was the year I was born.
Oh, now you're making me feel even older now. You sound like my daughter now. But I came in 1991, and that year there was a terrible, tragic event in North Carolina, the Imperial Foods fire. 25 employees were killed. Over 50 were injured. The plant was a total loss. There was a lot of national attention on North Carolina, and rightfully so. I mean, you have a big event like that. Well, I just happened to be in the process of interviewing with the Department of Labor prior to that. And back then, the way the interview process worked is first you had to come and do an interview and take a test. Everybody that worked for the Department of Labor and the OSHA division had to take a test. And it was an efficiency test on safety and health to make sure that you had the technical skills. And so if you scored a certain score on that test, then you're eligible for a second interview. And if you did well in your second interview, then you were eligible to be hired, but then there was a third interview. Well, it just so happened that Imperial Foods tragedy happened on September 3rd. Shortly thereafter, and I can't remember the exact date, but in September, I found myself in Raleigh for my third interview at the Labor Building. And so as I approached the Labor Building, I saw a lot of news trucks out front. I came into the commissioner's office, which is not far from where we're at right now. And I sat down in the commissioner's waiting room because I was waiting to have an interview with him. Well, in the waiting room along with me was a handful of reporters, national reporters. And as soon as I sat down and I had a suit and tie on, and I guess I looked somewhat important, the reporters started coming up to me and wanting my comments on Imperial Foods and asking me what happened. And I looked at them and I said, look, I don't even work here. And they said, oh, okay. And they kind of backed away. And just at that time, Commissioner Brooks at the time was the commissioner, John Brooks. He opened his door and said, "Kevin, come on in." And they all looked at me, and I went into the office and closed the door, and there was cameras flashing, and there was video rolling. And I don't think any of that went on the air because I didn't have anything to do with the department. But anyway, I sat there and listened to the Commissioner Brooks, and I saw everything that was going on. And at the time, I was working for the Maryland OSHA program, and they offered me a job, and I was just thinking to myself at the time, as all this was going on, what am I getting myself into? Do I really want to work for the North Carolina Department of Labor? My original intention was to move down to North Carolina because things had gotten so busy up in the area that I grew up in. It was taking me 2 hours to commute into work in the morning. It was taking me 2 hours to commute back.
Wow.
And so I was looking for a little bit different lifestyle. I was single, or at least I thought I was single. I was dating what is now my wife. So she wasn't too thrilled when I did decide to move down here. But so anyway, they did offer me a job, but I really had to think about it because I wasn't sure what was going on. They were talking about, there was headlines in the paper about possibly taking over the program, making it a federal program. And I thought it might be a good opportunity with all the scrutiny going on. But just to hedge my bets, the commissioner at the then Maryland Occupational Safety and Health gave me a 2-year leave of absence and said I could come back anytime I wanted to in that time period. And so I got that in my back pocket. So I came down to North Carolina. I haven't regretted it. It's been a great opportunity. There were a lot of opportunities. The program expanded exponentially. We went from having a program that was on probation, you can say. OSHA assumed concurrent jurisdiction until 1996 when we got our final approval status. So we went from kind of being on probation to having our final approval status in a short period of time. And from that point on, North Carolina has been looked at as a leader in occupational safety and health. And I'm just so proud of all the people that work for the division over the years. And if you go over to the revenue building, there is a framed plaque in there with everybody's signatures that worked for the Department of Labor at the time, or in the OSH division. I think there's 176 signatures when we got our final approval status, and it was a big moment. And I'm really proud of what we were able to accomplish here in the OSH division. So that's kind of a story about my beginnings with the department. A few other highlights, or lowlights as you call it, is when you've been in this field long enough, unfortunately, the main thing that we want to do is reduce injuries, illnesses, and fatalities. But sometimes they occur, and sometimes it's not easy to handle, and we've had our share of events over the years. But I think we stood up during those times, and we did what we needed to do, and as a result, it made a lot of other workplaces safer. We sent, after the World Trade Center event in 2001, North Carolina Department of Labor's OSH division sent over 50 people to the World Trade Center site, and we worked in shift rotations to make sure, as they were cleaning out the debris of the trade center and recovering the bodies of the victims at the trade center, that no additional people got injured, and nobody did. There was no significant injuries or fatalities as a result of that process. Now, some of the people there did suffer from inhalation hazards, but they weren't because of anything that OSH did on the job site, and so we handled that. We've also, had over time some pretty significant events. We had a explosion at Synthron where a batch reactor had a runaway reaction in the western part of the state, and this was you weren't too old at the time, so you probably don't remember it. But myself, I was the assistant director at the time, and the director, Alan McNeely, at the time. We happened to be in the western part of the state when this happened, so we immediately went up there, and it was a very bad event. It could have been a lot worse. There were 14 people that were injured. We were able to find out what happened, and we worked with the Chemical Safety Board. We put together a very good informative video and information to hopefully prevent that from happening again somewhere else. We had an event in 2009 at Conagra Foods that killed 3 and ended up shutting down the plant, and 300 people were unemployed. And then just this year in 2022, earlier in the year in Winston-Salem at the Winston Weaver facility, they had an ammonia nitrate fire that had a devastating fire that resulted in the evacuation of a large part of Winston-Salem, which was about 6,000 people, including our field office, which was just a couple of miles from there. The reason I bring all these things up is it really kind of sheds the importance of what we do. And we want to prevent these type of events from occurring. We can't be everywhere at once. The employers and employees have to be vigilant at their work. But at the same time, when an event like that happens, we have to learn from it and get information out there, get outreach information, put hazard alerts out to prevent it from happening again. So those are some of the things that I oversaw during the time. And hopefully none of these things happen again in the future, but if they do, I think OSH will rise to the occasion and find out what happened. And hopefully we can prevent these things from happening.
So do you have any parting words of wisdom for the employees at NCDOL?
I don't know. I'm just tired. I think, sometimes we get lost in details and other things, and throughout my career, it's Department of Labor is a fairly small department, unlike some of the other departments in the state, and so you do get to know people fairly well. It's kind of like a family, and every family has your cousin that may not all be there and things like that, but at the end of the day, it's still your cousin. And so I think from that standpoint, we've always got along really well, but sometimes you overlook some things and you think maybe somebody's working against you where they're really not working against you. Everybody has a job to do. But at the end of the day, we all have common goals, even within the Department of Labor. All the sections within the Department of Labor are somewhat tied to safety and health, whether it's the elevator division or the boiler section or OSH, training and education within OSH. And so sometimes it's hard to look at outside of your little sandbox and look at what's going on otherwise, but you just need to remember that we're all part of the same team, and you don't necessarily need to work separately at two different things. You can work together and actually make each other's job easier. And so, if I had any parting words, I would say just remember that. You have some great people, work with their strengths, help them with their weaknesses, and together, I'm starting to sound like a kumbaya message or something, but I do believe it's much easier when you're working together and not thinking that someone's out to get you. You don't need to be defensive. If somebody says, hey, it might be better if you do this, it's not really an attack on you. It just might actually be better. And I found through the years that when I first came on, when I was a young employee, I didn't really like people telling me what to do. As I got older, I was like, yeah, tell me what to do. As a matter of fact, here, you can do it. But my advice would be just, continue to work with each other. Don't be the weak link. Pull your weight. Sometimes you can get complacent. But the team is only as good as its weakest link. You've heard that, like the chain is only as good as its weakest link. Well, that's the same thing with what you're doing, and so you all have to work together to either achieve your goals or not achieve your goals. And so I wish nothing but success for the Department of Labor and the OSH division, and it's been here long before I came, and it'll be here long after I leave. But I am looking forward to hearing how things are going. I'm not getting out of the safety and health field completely, so I'll still be in the safety and health field. I'm going to be doing some consulting. And I probably won't represent cases against the North Carolina Department of Labor, but you never know. But I am looking forward to seeing how the department continues to grow and the division continues to grow.
Well, Kevin, we wish you the best in your next chapter, and you will be greatly missed here at the North Carolina Department of Labor, and it's been a pleasure to work with you over my last 18 months here at the department. So.
And it's been good getting to know you. I'm sorry it's been such a short period of time. It's been a long time for me, but it's been a short period of time for you. But there comes a time, they always say there comes a time when it's time to go. And I'm not ready to stop working, but I'm ready to stop working with the North Carolina Department of Labor. But I wish everybody the best.
Well, thank you again for joining us today on this podcast, Kevin, and we really appreciate it.
All right, no problem.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for tuning in, y'all. And remember, your safety is our priority.